She said 5 times over. Okay, the jury is now out to lunch in California versus Kellen Winslow II. They just heard from the prosecution's initial closing argument. We have a long way to go. You want to keep it right here because soon, about 40 minutes, 42 minutes, we're going to hear from the defense. We're going to hear from Mark Carlos. And Mark Carlos is probably going to go on for, I don't know, an hour or so because he has a lot to say. Okay, because D.A. Owens, he laid it out. He laid it out for all 12 charges, all 5 Jane Does. And Mark Carlos, he has to bring it. And we expect him to. Oh, yes, we certainly do. So they're out to lunch. We should be back inside the courtroom in about 41 minutes. And we'll take you there live. You will not miss a minute. But right now, I want to bring in my friend, criminal defense attorney Brian Claypool, who is live outside of the San Diego courthouse and has been following along with us, gavel to gavel, during this trial. Brian Claypool, initial impressions of the prosecutor's closing argument.
Seema, high drama in San Diego. Me Too movement meets the sports world, and you guys are doing a great job of covering this case. And I was able to slither into the courtroom, believe it or not, for a couple hours. And I thought Dan Owen did a pretty good job. And by the way, if I hadn't been a lawyer, I would have been a teacher. So today I get to grade Dan Owen, and I would give him a B. I thought he did a really good job of what you just played for your viewers. At the end, I thought was the best part. The she said, this isn't about he said, she said. This is about she said, she said, she said, she said, she said. That, to me, was the most powerful, pivotal moment of this entire trial. I mean, the courtroom was aghast. I mean, people were looking at each other. And that really puts a lot of pressure now on Mark Carlos. Why? Because his client decided not to testify. And if you think about it, Seema, you're a really good lawyer. Think about what Dan Owen did. He might have gotten away with the curveball because under the Constitution, you're not allowed to comment that a defendant hasn't testified at trial because you have a constitutional right to remain silent. And him saying, Dan Owen saying there at the end, it's not about he said, she said, it's she said, she said. That, in my mind, was a creative way of backdooring that, hey, wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen, you never even heard from Kellen Winslow. So where's the he said evidence? It's not here.
BC, this is why I have you here, because you come up with these gems, these legal gems. That was great. That was great. You're absolutely right. It was completely creative. It was innocuous, and it was objectionable, and nobody caught it. Now,
absolutely.
That was definitely a powerful moment.
That's
For
right.
me, one of the most powerful moments was early on when D.A. Owens said, this is anatomy of a sex case. Let's actually play the clip.
You heard from the fresh complaint witnesses, or what's also called outcry witnesses. You heard from the spouses. You heard from gym employees. You heard from the deputies. You heard from the detectives. You heard from Nicole Edwards, Brandon Guillermo, Troy M. This is the anatomy of a sex crimes case. That's how these cases are proven. You have the victim's testimony that's then confirmed and corroborated by the prior statements that they've made, the physical evidence that gets collected, and circumstantially supporting and corroborating what they've told you.
The anatomy of a sex crimes case. What I thought was persuasive about saying that to the jury is that Owens is sending a message. This is not a unique case. You don't have to stretch. You don't have to reach to convict this guy. It's very simple. This is a formulaic type of sex crimes case. Just fill in the blanks, and it will lead you to only one place, and that is guilt. What did you think?
Yeah, absolutely, Seema. But before I comment on that, can I mention one other thing that Dan Owen said that I thought that he backdoored, and it's right along what we were talking about before. He said at the end, too, where is the evidence that these victims didn't consent? Think about that again. That is the second time that he said in his closing argument, where is the he said evidence? And if I was Mr. Carlos or Mr. Watkins, I would have been livid. I would have objected. I would have called a sidebar. And I would have put on the record that the prosecutor is suggesting to the jury or holding it again. Here's what he's doing. He's holding it against Kellen Winslow for not having testified. That's clearly a constitutional violation. So I think the defense lawyers fumbled on that one. But getting back to your point, I thought what Dan Owen did really well is he tied all of these victims together. He had photographs of each. Whenever he said referenced Jane Doe 1, there was a photograph of Jane Doe 1, and then Jane Doe 2, 3, up to 5. And he then tied them together. I thought one of the other pivotal points was, and Shanley had talked about it, was he brought all this other evidence together to say, hey, you can use this you can use convictions on 1, 2, and 3 as evidence that Winslow forcibly raped Jane Doe 4. And I thought that was masterful.
But the consent argument, I think, started with Brian Watkins on his opening statement making promises that they didn't deliver. Let's hear a little bit of that.
There's been infidelity in his relationship. Kellen's not proud of it, but he's never denied it. He's been unfaithful. Not once, not twice, but numerous times. I would not dignify these things by calling them affairs, because they weren't. They were sex. No strings attached sex. It's wrong. It's wrong, it's immoral, but it is not illegal.
So let's hear now how DA Owens addressed this no strings attached sex during his closing argument.
Do you think that this was no strings attached consensual sex? There's no such evidence that's been presented to you to suggest that, to support that. But they're going to try to ask you to use the presumption of innocence to somehow poke holes, right? But when they try to poke those holes, none of it actually impacts the core facts of what happened. The peripheral, extraneous, things that the law instructs you that you get to decide whether they're important or not. So reject that argument.
Brian, DA Owens took the fact that Winslow didn't testify, as you said, and he's actually kind of putting their face in the dirt and shoving it in the dirt with that whole argument, bringing that no strings attached sex consent didn't come in, and speak to the bigger issue of us defense attorneys making promises on closing arguments, opening statements that we don't keep and that we can deliver by closing.
Right, great point, Seema. Because as a defense lawyer, you can't overpromise an opening statement, and that's what Brian Watkins did. And you've got to be careful what you say. You've got to have evidence to support what you say in opening argument. And here, I'm going to tell you what I think it looks like. It looks arrogant on the part of Kellen Winslow and his lawyers to make those comments in opening statement, and then not have him testify and sit on that hot seat and talk about what happened. And now Dan Owens preyed upon that. And I thought he did a good job.
Thank you, Brian Claypool. You know we're going to be coming back to you later on in the program.